A moment of significant change or a turning point, altering your course, is known as an inflection point. In business, these moments have a significant impact in many ways. That's why we're speaking with leaders from across the asset management industry to hear the stories of their inflection points and the impact they've had on their journeys. Join me and my colleague Mark Spina as we explore the business of being in business, with insights that can help you wherever you may find yourself. This is Inflection Points.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Inflection Points. I'm Jillian Del Signore, your host, and I am so excited to be joined today by a dear friend, peer, Joanne Hill. Joanne, for those who don't know her, is the chief advisor for strategy and research at SIBOVEST, and in her spare time is on the board of governors of the CFA Institute and is on the board of the CFA Research Foundation. I really encourage you to spend some time with Joanne's full bio, but a couple of the highlights: she brings 25 years of experience across organizations like ProShares and Goldman Sachs, where she led global equity index and derivatives. She's been in the ETF industry really from the word go, literally helping write the book on it, being the co-author of the Comprehensive Guide to ETFs that she co-authored with Dave Nadig and Matt Hogan, and is also William Sharp recipient of the William Sharp Indexing Lifetime Achievement Award. And how Joanne and I ended up crossing paths, as I think many of you who listen to Inflection Points appreciate, is through my work at Women in ETFs. Joanne is one of the founders and was one of the first co-presidents and is one of the original leaders in running Chicago. We had opportunity to cross paths and grow close over the years. And so I'm thrilled to have Joanne here today to talk about her journey and the different inflection points that she's had throughout her career up to and including what she's doing today. So Joanne, thank you so much for joining me. I'm thrilled to have you.
Great. And I'm thrilled to be here. Always fun to talk about career journeys.
Yeah,
But a lot of one.
Yeah, they're never a straight line. And I
No.
think we all learn so much from these journeys. And I think those that have been listening to our previous guests, I think, have had the opportunity to really get some great nuggets, as we all find ourselves at some point or another trying to make a particular decision. And do you go to the left or to the right? And I think really excited to talk about the pivots that you've made. But I want to start, before we get to where you are today and how you made your way to SIBOVEST and certainly everything that came before it, let's go back to your more formative years, right? Have you think back pre-GW, right? Back, if you want to go back further than your time in university, were there particular people, influences in your life that drove you the direction that you ultimately ended up going in your...
There certainly were. And I do want to kick this off by saying that one of the pieces of career advice that I always give when asked, and my mantra is, somebody gave this to me,
Okay.
is never look ahead more than 3 years. So as you're making a decision, figure out what you want to do for the next 3 years.
I love that.
Because the world will change, your interests will change. And so just keep that focus and you'll probably serve yourself well.
Yeah.
Having done that, so you have to realize I am a child of the 60s, protests, civil rights, Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And I was a woman. I was fortunately the only child. My father would have been a kind of called a STEM guy now. He was in the Signal Corps during World War II, ended up working at Western Electric, very bright. My mother was at the top of her class, but she was a homemaker. But I think during grade school and high school, I was always coming out in a small town in Pennsylvania, but at the top of the class. And I think that this encouraged me to go to college, right? My parents had not gone to college and I wanted to get out of this small town. So I had relatives in Washington, D.C., two uncles, and I visited there. And so to me, this was the perfect city to pursue a broader, especially global vision. I was interested in politics. I thought, worst case, I'll marry a politician because there weren't many opportunities. And I was push, go to Penn State, be a school teacher. But that was the last thing I could do. So I ended up at a university in Washington. Georgetown didn't let women in at the time. Went to American, got a great degree in international politics.
Okay.
But I got disillusioned of international politics because of the Vietnam War. And I decided I needed a new direction. I met my husband, who senior year, he got a job at the Federal Reserve Board. No, why not try this out?
Yeah.
I lucked into a job there learning Fortran, which was a programming language, and they taught me finance, and I got an interest in finance. So when I went to grad school, instead of going to grad school in international politics at Columbia, where I got my MBA and PhD at Syracuse, where my husband went in economics. I was in finance, and we just spent. I pivoted
Yeah.
into finance. We tried out teaching for about 4 years, and said, you know what, this may be what we want to do, but let's try something else. I went to New York on a year's leave. And so that was in the early 80s. And when that happened, within a couple of years, people that I really looked up to in academic finance, Fisher Black, Richard Roll, a number of people shifted into working at investment banks. And Fisher came to Goldman. So I was inspired to just stick it out and stay in New York and pursue a research and strategy career. It was great. I picked up derivatives because when I was in the academic world, the Chicago Board of Trade was offering to send people to Chicago, all expenses paid, for 3 days to learn about this new thing, financial futures.
Oh, wow.
I joined that gravy train and went out there, and I needed to get publications. I needed a field, and I felt like this new area of futures and options was one that would be fruitful for a young scholar. So I picked it up, and that then helped me get a job on Wall Street. I first started out at firms Kidder, Peabody, and Payne Webb through turmoil.
Yeah.
But I was good at what I did, and Goldman came recruiting. And at the time, Goldman really did very few what they were called lateral hires, people they didn't hire out of school, but they needed someone in derivatives. The person I worked with was going into the global side. So I became head of US futures and options research at Goldman.
And so you came in at that level?
I came in, here's the important thing. I had been a managing director at Payne Webber. When I was recruited to Goldman, they were still a partnership. This was 92.
Yeah.
And they had offered no one from the outside partnerships at that point. So I had to decide to take a VP title.
Sure.
Yeah, Goldman. But I had been through these two firms that Kidder had been taken over by GE. Payne Webber was having financial difficulties at the time. And I felt like a place like Goldman could give me a platform where I could survive as a research strategist in derivatives and change my focus. They were, I had Fisher Black call me to encourage me to take the offer.
Can we just pause on that for a second? You say that so casually. Fisher Black called you to encourage to take the offer at GSAM, I keep thinking GSAM. I'm going back to my days. GS, Goldman Sachs. Yeah, that's incredible.
It was incredible. And I was actually embarrassed for him. I said, oh, please, I appreciate this. But but he talked about, and I knew him for 2 years before he passed away, as I did join.
Yeah.
And he was always one who loved the synergies between practice and theory.
Right.
That was his passion. And I think he saw it in me as well. And he just said, come and it's a lot of fun. Just see how all this all works.
Yeah.
So it
can be that disconnect, right? With academia and actual sort of practicing of that sort of research.
Yeah.
And you got the opportunity to look that out.
Yeah. And he had people don't realize this, but when he came, I don't think he was a partner when he came, but he had come up with the idea of doing arbitrage on value line futures versus the value line index. He discovered a quirk that the index was a geometric mean, but it wasn't pricing that way. And he actually made a nice contribution to Goldman profitability by sorting that out. And
figuring out that algorithm. Wow, that'll get you partner. Yeah, that'll get you partner. I spent time at Goldman as well, later years, but what was it like at that time being a woman in that part of the business at a firm like Goldman Sachs?
It was great to be a woman at Goldman Sachs because the prior firms were, and maybe it was just my timing, but was when I came into the industry in the early 80s, they were still having strippers on trading floors for
Right.
guys' birthdays. You would
Wonderful.
discreetly step aside after dinner with the client because then who knows where they were going.
Yeah.
It was the Wild West,
Yeah.
80s, early 90s on Wall Street for women. But at the point where I joined Goldman, there was enough critical mass that we were forming women's networks,
Okay.
making the business case for bringing more women in. We were beginning to see more women clients. Actually, I was recommended to Goldman. There was a senior client of mine, Carol Zipkin, who ran indexing at Alliance Capital. And she happened to be married to Dexter Earle, who was the partner who hired me.
Oh, wow.
And she recommended me to him as someone to check out. So I learned early on power of network.
Understanding, especially in an environment like that early on, the importance of networking, the importance of creating those women's networks in general, but in particular, a network of women at a place like Goldman or in the finance
Right.
industry in general. So then let's talk about this funny little wrapper that started to appear in the 90s, the ETF, and how you got involved there and what the decision-making process was around that opportunity.
Yeah. So I love my position at Goldman because I was affiliated with this group called Index and Derivative Sales, and I bought stocks.
Sure.
So I had a suite of products from options, futures, index, quant. And so every year we would decide, okay, which are the 2 or 3 that are going to resonate this year, and we'll focus on them. So that gave me an opportunity to be dynamic and adapt to the markets, which was very helpful in that time frame. And so indexing really began to take off mid 80s to mid 90s, right? Institutional space, separately managed accounts, big providers like State Street, Barclays, was in Chicago. And so even though the spider happened in the early 90s, it was really not a product launch. It was just a single weird off product that had a little bit of following among retail, but not really.
Sure.
What made a big difference was Patty Dunn, Barclays Global Investors, saw this huge growth in mutual funds in the late 90s, and she wanted a piece of the action for her firm. She was an amazing executive. And so she and this guy, Lee Cranefus, came up with this idea that this ETF thing. And so they bought I forget what they were called.
The webs.
The webs. They bought the webs, and they decided to develop this whole suite of iShares to really compete with the tech-focused mutual fund and get Barclays into the retail marketplace because they already had the platform to manage it and trade it. They just needed a product for the retail marketplace. And so Goldman was we had a great relationship with Barclays, and they asked that myself and Barbara Mueller write a paper about how ETFs work that would complement the launch of iShares. And so it made sense to me. I was covering index products. And so that's how I got into this.
Wow.
And we collaborated with iShares as they launched, as they were in a customer, and make sure that we could educate. And I did the first ETF card, which was 3 pages. But what we did was we put on the volume in the underlying stocks.
Okay.
There was no ETF.
The very first back card. That's
so
great.
Fun stories. And then when Vanguard wanted to do the Vipers, they also consulted with Mike Cranieri and Corey Lang, who were at Goldman, and we work with them in a similar way to get their product line launched. So it was really, so then I still had a suite of products under my management domain, but I focused on ETFs and volatility with 2 others, and that was my little sandbox.
That's amazing.
I thought it was, and then last point was that there were 2 bear markets, 2000, 2002, deep bear markets, 2007 to 2009. And in both of that, so iShares got off track because there was no retail interest.
Sure.
It was so the hedge funds picked up the ETFs in a lot of ways for shorting. So they were really started out more as trading vehicles.
Yeah.
And then after the financial crisis, that's when really the ETFs really gained traction because they had the transparency, the visibility. They were perfect products for coming out of that bear market. So that was the other.
Yeah. No, that's precisely when I joined, actually, was in '08.
Right.
And so rode and watched this evolution of the vehicle continue, institutional demand, advisor demand, retail demand, and how '08 really impacted the growth of things like fixed income ETFs and
Right.
all this evolution that's happened since then. That's amazing. For those, do a little Googling of the names that Joanne just mentioned and those that she got to interface with to really get this industry off the ground is just extraordinary. So you had this amazing opportunity at Goldman, had such an incredible impact on the firm, on the industry. What was the decision-making process and the inflection point that happened for you to make the shift from Goldman to ProShares? Because you had a strong research, and
Right.
research is the tie that binds, right? So there was a strong
Right.
research role there at ProShares as well. Very different. They're a obviously well-known issuer, but very unique and sort of niche in what they do.
Right. So you have to realize what it was like. So the annualized return of equities in the 2000s was less than 1%. Okay. And in 2000, 2002, I had to manage through a period where Goldman had to cut 35% of its equity staff. It was
Wow.
a challenge at investment bank. Then comes the financial crisis, facing yet another tough period, what's going to be a tough period for the sell side. And so I was one of the older people on the trading floor. I 17 years. And so it was just a good time for me. I had always wanted to go to the buy side.
Yeah.
And I had bought my home down here in Kiowa in South Carolina. So I was looking for a job with less hours, more flexibility. I didn't want to manage people anymore. And so I looked at the ETF industry and I felt like ETFs were going to be what would thrive and grow after the financial crisis. But my interest was derivatives.
Sure. Yeah.
And I wanted a smaller firm. I wanted to go place where I could have an impact with my background in derivatives. And I really thought there was an opportunity to do ETFs on the VIX futures.
Sure.
And I had been involved at Goldman in the redefinition of the VIX and very much committed to this idea that there could be futures on the VIX. So it was a great chance to work with them on their leveraged and inverse products, as well as some in the volatility space and the quant space, because they pivoted and moved into quant and alternatives. However, soon after I got there was a lot of controversy around the inverse.
Right.
People didn't understand. They had a daily objective. So that created a lot of challenges for me, but I was able to write papers and help in education. So that was good.
You and I were talking before we started recording today just about the importance of education. And I think a firm like ProShares and the opportunity you had there to educate on a vehicle or an exposure put inside that wrapper and the importance of understanding what it actually did is so critical. I'm reflecting back before we jump to your move to SIBO. I'm reflecting back to what I wrote down. Never look ahead more than 3 years. Did you, during those 17 years at Goldman, did you every couple years, do you have an exercise you go through every couple years that says, is this where I want to be now and where do I want to be in 3 years?
I do. And so at Goldman, they would change. I was the exception, but they followed this philosophy and changed some dimension of most people's jobs every 3 or 4 years. They moved to a new location. They shifted them to a different product. My group went through this. I had at one point, they gave me the opportunity to cover trading costs and market microstructure, which I took and focus on that. I expanded into, I took an opportunity to be the person covering the asset owners, the pension industry.
Sure. Yeah.
Management of my group. The last 3 years so I saw this happening within the broader organization and I tried to change. At one point, I was just US research and strategy, but then my boss actually made partner. So then I shifted to a global focus and I did mostly Europe and Asia. And stopped doing US, brought somebody up to do that. So I tried to change what I did every 3 or 4 years in a pretty material way, even though I was at the same organization.
I find it very interesting to talk to someone who's been in an organization for a long period of time like that. But the ability to stay satisfied, stay engaged, continue to flex and learn, fantastic to be able to do that. So let's get current. SIBO Vest, very involved again in really unique cutting edge product with what you're doing there on the structured outcome side. What brought you over to SIBO Vest? What was this most recent inflection point?
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting, I think. But so actually, after 3 or 4 years at ProShares, I said I need something more. I was getting
Yeah.
bored. And so I actually switched to part-time and wrote my book on ETFs and helped found women in ETFs. So
Yes.
it gave me the time. I wanted to do something that would be a bit more of a legacy, as something that would position me for help being on boards that would be more industry wide focused.
Mm.
Felt like I was getting too narrow in my role at ProShares. So
Sure.
that really worked well for me. And I did that. So I was part time my last 3 years there. And then I was really interested in options and volatility, and I call it reshaping return patterns with options. And it was clear to me there could be a major product line within ETFs in this area, but that ProShares was not interested in developing. They had a lot of other things that were going well for them. And two of my former colleagues at ProShares, had started this new firm that was doing kind of structured products packaged in ETFs, and they had a lot of option features. So they've been trying to talk me into join them. Karan Sood and Jeff Chang helped them out. But what happened was SIBO basically bought 50% interest in their
Okay.
company, and that got my attention. So
Of course.
when SIBO did that, I said, this is going to have some staying power. And this might be, I've been trying for my whole career to broaden the appeal of option strategies. And I said, this is a chance, Joanne. You have to join them
Yeah.
and try it. And they were very good. They let me just been working only 25 to 30% of my time for them. But I've been a sounding board. I've helped them hire people. I have helped them develop the education around buffer funds can be used and fit into an asset allocation context. I think we had a lot of alignment of what they wanted to accomplish. I saw as an opportunity. But I was pushing them to do ETFs from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that it just took a little while because of some issues in kind of the way the company had ownership. So now they partnered with First Trust, a sub-advisor, and that really helped, course.
Yeah, they've done amazing.
Having a great distribution organization combined with a good portfolio management, product development team at SIBO Vest. So they've had a lot of success. They're approaching 10 billion in assets. It's amazing.
It is amazing. I know I have a lot of friends at First Trust, and it is incredible to watch the growth that they've had in those products in particular. The last thing I want to touch on is right? Women in ETFs. And I think you and I got to know each other through that process.
Right.
And I think would love to get your perspective on the impact. Because as I've been writing things down as we've been talking, there's a couple words that continue to come to mind for me. One of them is impact, and the impact that you've had on the industry, clearly on your peers. This idea of educating, right? Everywhere you've been, you've continued to educate and been on the cutting edge of product development and educating investors on that. And then leaving a legacy. And so I think the work that you and we collectively have done at Women in ETFs, I think, is about our legacy and about the importance of networking. So I'd love to end just with kind of your thoughts on what it is that sort of got us started, where you think we have the opportunity to go.
Yeah. So I think the original idea behind Women in ETFs was that we had enough women in the industry if we all just got together in the various brands, because it's a big ecosystem. Of course, we have exchanges, brokerage firms, asset managers. It's hard to think of another product that has index providers, compliance, legal. And so if we combine all of us together, that we can have the critical mass to make a difference and to benefit among ourselves from knowing one another. And I always say, even though it's a nonprofit organization, there is a little bit of a business aspect, and always has always been to it. And I thought that I knew through my Goldman Sachs platform and ProShares a lot of people in the industry, but boy, the opportunity to meet people like you and other women and men, it's really provided a great vehicle for me to stay connected now that I'm doing other things as well. And I think it just provides this unique benefit and service to women and men in our industry to connect with each other in a different way, be educated. I know many of us have changed jobs and used advice or connections that we've picked up in women in ETFs. So, and there really wasn't any other organization in the ETF industry that was like this. It was just, I had no idea it would take off the way it did. It's
8,000 members around the world at this point.
And so to me, it's been probably the most successful thing I've done. And it hasn't made me any money. It hasn't made people money. But as far as impact and education, like, I'm so happy I did.
Absolutely. And I have chills right now. I was asked recently, what's the job that you've had in your life that's had the most impact? And I said, women in ETFs. It's never a job I've actually had, but it is for sure the one I've had the most impact.
We spend a lot of time on it, but
Yeah.
I don't have too many regrets because I think it's paid off for me personally and for the industry and others.
Absolutely. It's passion projects for so many of us. And I think you're right. I mean, the first thing I said to you before we started recording is, I need to ask you, I need your advice. It's like the first people I think of, whether I'm changing a job or I have something complicated, is like, where are my as Linda would say, where are my wee sisters to talk to? This has been just awesome. Those are the words I keep coming back to: educate, impact, and leaving a legacy. Right. And boy, have you done all of those things.
Thank you for giving me an outlet to talk about this.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's always fun. And I look forward to hearing your story.
Absolutely.
When you're at
I know my co-host Mark may have to turn the table on me and I'll turn the table on him. But no, I do appreciate it. And I would encourage everyone, like I said, for those who want to get more familiar with Joanne's work, on her own website, you can find a lot of her work. You can certainly find the book, The Comprehensive Guide to ETFs, and many other papers. And certainly for those that want to hear more Inflection Points episodes and stories of others in our industry and their personal journeys, we encourage you to become a member of Flex Networks, flexnetworks.com, and you can certainly listen to this episode and all of our episodes there. You can also catch us on Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So thank you again, Joanne, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you again next time.
The information contained in this recording is provided as is for educational and informational purposes only and should not serve as the basis for any trading or investing decisions. Flex Networks makes no representations and disclaims all express, implied, and statutory warranties of any kind to any viewer, listener, or other third party. Neither Flex Networks nor any of its affiliates make any endorsement of any particular company, security, product, or financial strategy, and nothing contained in this recording should be construed as investment advice. Investors should undertake their own due diligence and carefully evaluate companies before investing.